Pause order up here already. We on? Is there... Can you guys hear me? Can't tell it's on. Okay, good. Thank you. So good afternoon. I've got a bit of a cold here, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. If I get scratchy, I have to stop and take a drink. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're here to discuss the FY 2019 performance results of ICE enforcement and removal operations and discuss how the ongoing crisis at the border has impacted ICE's interior enforcement efforts. Simply put, the border crisis and the unprecedented increase in Customs and Border Protection apprehensions have required a significant resource reallocation and made it far more challenging for ICE to carry out its vital national security and public safety missions. In addition to managing a greater number of detainees and a vastly expanded non-detained docket created by this crisis, officers throughout the country are working hard to overcome and increase the number of non-cooperating jurisdictions and reckless policies and laws that induce illegal activity by shielding criminal aliens from federal authorities. This crisis at the border affects communities throughout the United States. These individuals that are coming here illegally do not stay in these border communities. They are dispersing throughout this country. So no matter where you live in the U.S., when criminal aliens know that they'll be released back into the community, even after being arrested for a criminal violation of that community's laws, rather than being turned over to ICE, this encourages further illegal immigration. It's a pull factor, and it makes all of us less safe. As I mentioned, the crisis at the border has led to record numbers of non-detained cases. Well, these are individuals who have come to the border, crossed illegally, and because we cannot detain them, whether it's because they're a family unit and we're unable to do so because of the Florida Settlement Agreement, whether they're unaccompanied alien children that are turned over to HHS, or whether it's the time and time again issue with us not having the appropriate funding for detention beds, even though we continually request Congress to fund us at the levels that we require. Our level of non-detained cases surpassed 3 million this year for the first time. 3.2 million non-detained cases. That's a 600,000 increase from FY 2018 and almost a million increase since FY 2017. And with a little over 5,000 law enforcement officers, ICE ERO simply does not have the resources to effectively manage this increase of individuals on our non-detained docket. To put it in context, we were only able to detain about 1.6% of the individuals that are on our dockets. And that's with an average detainee population of 51,000 a day, and at times during high peaks we were over 56,000. But yet that's less than 2% of the people that are coming here to this country illegally. The obvious result of that is as the docket continues to grow, so does our fugitive docket. We're approaching 600,000 people on our fugitive docket. These are individuals who have come through the country, come into the country illegally, gone through the immigration process, availed themselves of all due process, and have been ordered removed by an immigration judge. And it's incumbent upon us to execute those removal orders. So we're sworn to do. It's how we maintain integrity of the system. Yet there's 600,000 out there that we can't get our hands on. And we simply have not been given the resources with which to do so. The number of fugitive operations teams has remained stagnant for the better part of a decade, and Congress has failed to give us more resources for those teams. Despite these challenges, ICE remains dedicated and committed to our obligations to strengthen national security and uphold public safety to the best of our ability with the resources that we've been given. Over the last 12 months, federal officers with ICE across the country arrested more than 143,000 individuals for civil immigration violations and successfully removed more than 267,000 aliens, 86% of the people that ICE arrested last year were either convicted criminal or had pending criminal charges. And that percentage has remained largely consistent over the past decade, both in the prior administration and this one. We're here in Dallas today because nearly 17,000 of these arrests were made by the men and women of ERO's Dallas field office, which covers North Texas and the state of Oklahoma. And one of the things which is unique, although it shouldn't be, is that the level of cooperation between state and local law enforcement and our officers here is unsurpassed anywhere in the country. When you have that cooperation, you have these kind of results. You get these criminals off the street. 95% of the people that were arrested by the Dallas field office for immigration violations were convicted criminals or had pending criminal charges, higher than the national average. And while the Dallas office represents the highest number of arrests within ICE ERO, it's merely representative of the great work being done by the dedicated professionals of ERO throughout the country every single day. If you take a look behind what these arrests actually mean, you will see the profound impact that we have upon public safety of this country. Tens of thousands of aggravated felons were taken off the streets last year. They include those with more than 1,900 with convictions or charges for homicide, more than 12,000 with convictions and charges for sexual offenses, more than 45,000 convictions and charges for assault, more than 10,000 weapon offenses. To all those people who say, hey, we need to stop gun violence, we need to get these weapons out of the hands of the criminals, I got one better for you. Why don't we get the criminals out of the country in the first place that don't belong here? It's important to note, and what's troubling from a public safety standpoint, that despite this tremendous work that was done last year, this is a decrease of 10% of overall arrests by ICE ERO last year and 12% when it comes to criminal aliens. What this means in real numbers and in real life and with real victims, that there are 13,000 fewer criminals that we arrested this year than we arrested last year as a direct result of two things: the crisis at the border and sanctuary jurisdictions that fail to cooperate with us. Despite those jurisdictions that have enacted policies and laws that prevent cooperation with ICE, our officers are constantly adapting how we work within these communities, how we do our job, and we will continue to do so. We will never stop doing the work that our professional, dedicated officers do, and it's our congressionally mandated duty to enforce these laws that we enforce. Looking at the criminal activity across the board, and I believe the report's been put out there, so you will see the depth and breadth of the criminal activity these individuals were involved in. For those we arrested and removed in FY 2019, it clearly shows no matter where you live in the United States, you are impacted by criminal aliens in this country, whether they crossed the border illegally, whether they came here legally and overstayed their visa. And the interior of our country is where these critical enforcement efforts need to continue to occur. Unfortunately, as I mentioned previously, our ability to conduct this at-large enforcement has been increasingly crippled by Congress's inability to provide sufficient funding for additional detention beds, transportation, and to maintain proper staffing levels for ICE officers and agents. When local jurisdictions refuse to cooperate with ICE and Congress fails to appropriately fund us at the levels we request and that we need, this results in the release of recidivist criminal aliens back into the communities, often with tragic results and unnecessary victimization. To be clear, as stated previously, ICE focuses our limited resources first and foremost by targeting those individuals illegally present in the United States who pose the greatest threat to public safety and border security, and our officers are out there every day making hundreds of arrests. Repeat criminal offenses committed by persons in violation of federal immigration law are preventable crimes. We are actually one of the few law enforcement agencies out there that can prevent crime. You go ask any law enforcement agency how much they can do to prevent crime, and they're going to tell you very little. We can do a lot. These are recidivist criminals. To put it in context, of the 123,000 people that we arrested last year with criminal convictions or criminal arrests, those accounted for almost 500,000 criminal charges or convictions. These are not single-time offenders getting pulled over for driving without a license. We actually have the ability to prevent crime. And any law enforcement agency out there should be taking advantage of that capability and working to find ways to cooperate with us and partner with us. for the good of the communities that they have sworn to serve. Even with that, we do have tremendous cooperation in most places throughout the country. 70% of the arrests that ERO makes are individuals that come out of a county jail or a state prison or a federal prison where they're doing time or have been recently arrested waiting to bond out for a criminal violation for which they were either arrested or convicted. In fact, many of these jurisdictions will say that they don't want ICE in their jails because they don't want ICE in their communities. The surest way to have ICE in your community is to not let us in the jail, because we are going to arrest these public safety threats. And if we can't get them in the jail, we're going to be out there on the street doing it. And that causes greater harm and greater disruption. It puts my officers at risk, it puts the general public at risk, and it puts the subject of these arrest warrants at risk as well. Our job is difficult enough without our local law enforcement partners operating in what can only be described as a politically motivated misinformation about ICE. Not just with what we do, but the manner in which we conduct our operations and our enforcement actions. One of the ways you'll hear about this is you'll hear local law enforcement agencies say, well, if ICE brings us a judicial warrant, we'll cooperate with their detainer. Those individuals are either completely ignorant of the law or being willfully disingenuous. There is no judge anywhere in this country, federal, state, local, judge or magistrate, that has the legal authority to issue a warrant for a civil immigration violation. That authority solely rests with supervisory immigration officers by statute as designed by Congress. So if these jurisdictions want to sit there and try to hide behind that, what I would say to them, if you don't want to cooperate with us, then own up to it. Say straight up, hey, look, I'm going to choose politics over public safety. We're not going to cooperate with you. Don't sit there and hide behind the judicial warrant excuse. That being said, I want to assure the American people that the dedicated, professional men and women of ICE will remain focused on our critical task at hand, and will continue doing everything we can to fulfill our mission and work for the continued safety and security of the American public in this great nation. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for doing this.
No, thanks for being here.
Diane Solis with the Dallas Morning News. Of those, could you give us a breakdown on criminal convictions only? You're putting pending charges.
So in 2019, I'm going to refer to my charts because I can't memorize this many numbers. In FY19, we had, of the arrests that ERO made, there were 143,099 arrests across the board. 92,108 were convicted criminals. 31,020 had pending criminal charges, and 19,971 were other immigration violators. So what the other immigration violators fall into, those are individuals that cross the border illegally. Many of those will actually be fugitives. So these are individuals that actually came through illegally, got caught by the Border Patrol, were processed, went through the judicial proceeding with immigration court process, were ordered removed, failed to comply with that removal order, and then we apprehend them. That is one of our big mission sets. When, in fact, when what was DRO at the time and now ERO stood up and started expanding, that's why we call them fugitive operations teams, because we were doing fugitive operations because Congress realized in the early 2000s that having a population of several 100,000 fugitives running free in this country was not a good situation. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of the people in this room and the people that have come before us, the numbers are overwhelming, and we simply have not been given the resources to keep up. That's why our fugitive population grows every year, despite our best efforts to go out there and apprehend these fugitives. And a lot of those other ones, to your question, are individuals that are reinstatements, meaning they've been here previously, they've been ordered removed by an immigration judge, they were actually deported, and they came back illegally, which is a federal felony, and one which we prosecute 6,000 or 7,000 times a year. Ma'am.
Hi, sir. Karen Mayo with Misinformation in Dallas. So I understand that for the arrests, you guys have a partnership with local jails and also CBP. But is the agency actively doing or performing raids, either at workplaces or looking for these individuals at their homes?
Well, we don't perform raids, we perform targeted enforcement actions. And if you look at the statistics that we have here, with 86% of the people coming to our attention as a result of their interaction with the criminal justice system, meaning they were arrested for a crime and were either convicted of that crime or were released pending the disposition of that crime, and we arrested them. They came to our attention because of their criminal activity. Had they not been arrested, in most cases, we're not going to even know who they are or that they're even here. So when we go out to make an arrest, we know who we're going to look for. We have addresses identified as to where we might be able to find that individual, whether it's a residence, whether it's a business. We have vehicles that we believe that individual is utilizing that we will follow and take enforcement actions that way. So we don't do raids. When you're asking about worksite enforcement, again, we don't do raids. When we do a worksite enforcement operation, you take the one in Mississippi, there were 14 federal search warrants that were issued that day by a federal judge based on probable cause presented to that judge. So we don't do raids, we do targeted enforcement actions. That's part of a criminal investigation. That case is ongoing. There's been over 100 people that have been indicted, though, with regard to the criminal activity which they were engaged in, but we don't do raids. Sir?
Dick Library, Associated Press. Can you talk about what's being done within existing funding to make more detention beds available, and especially family beds?
So we can only buy the number of beds that Congress appropriates us for. So last year and the previous years, we've been appropriated for 2,500 family unit beds. So we have not been able to expand our family detention. At this point, we're waiting for the budget for FY20. If Congress gives us additional funds to expand family detention, we would do so. But family detention at this point, based on the Florida settlement agreement, and our inability to hold the individuals throughout the pendency of the immigration court process is not effective on the front end. So what we're utilizing family detention for now is those individuals, or those family units that have gone through the immigration court process, have been ordered removed by an immigration judge and have failed to comply with that removal order. So now we're arresting fugitive families. So if you look at the numbers, we removed more than double the number of family units last year than we did the prior year. So we will utilize those family residential centers to stage those individuals and house them for a short period of time prior to removing them from the country and executing those judges' orders. That's one of the challenges we've had, as we've seen, and working with DOJ's Executive Office for Immigration Review. They set up an accelerated docket to try to give these individuals their day in court quicker. Some of these cases, if you come in and go to the non-detained docket, you could be 3, 4, 5 years before you have your case adjudicated. What we're trying to do, and what we tried to do, and DOJ was a great partner with this, was set up a system whereby people can make their claims, avail themselves of all due process, and at the end of that, but have a decision in a short period of time, within a year was the goal, so that those individuals with meritorious asylum claims could actually get that benefit and go on about their lives, as opposed to waiting 5 or 6 or 7 years in limbo, wondering if their claim is going to be adjudicated in their favor. And those that didn't have a claim that meets the legal threshold could be removed. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that the in absentia, meaning that the individuals don't even show up for their first hearing, the rate for that is 85%. So that means most of these individuals really aren't valid asylum claimants. They're just using that as a way and a loophole to exploit, to get here to the country and to get released, knowing full well that they're never going to follow through with that claim. We know full well, based on what we've done from an investigative standpoint with Homeland Security investigations, that many of these family units are not even family units. There's a huge market out there that the cartels and the criminal organizations are exploiting with regard to recycling children and renting them for the sole purpose of somebody coming in, an unrelated adult posing as a family unit, because they know that we can't detain them. And we've made over 1,000 prosecutions related to our family unit fraud. We've established DNA testing, which has led to the identification of at about 15% rate of individuals who are not related to the child that they're presenting themselves at the border with. Sir.
Clayton Neville at WBAP Radio. What do people in Central American countries, before they make their trip to the U.S., what do they need to know, or what message do you have for those people before they start their trip?
Well, the message I would have for them is that the likelihood of them being able to stay right now is much smaller than it was this time last year. We've tried everything we could under the laws that Congress has already established or under the regulations that currently exist to stem the flow of illegal entries, to set up a system whereby individuals with meritorious asylum claims can still make those claims, but those individuals that would come here without claims that are valid or claims that aren't going to meet the legal threshold to stay in this country don't expend their life savings and take that dangerous journey and come up to the country. What we've seen And I know CBP held a press conference earlier this week, and Mr. Morgan talked about the gains that we've seen at the border with 6 months, straight months of decreasing apprehensions. And a lot of that is a result of what we've done with regard to the migrant protection protocols, what we've done with the asylum cooperative agreements that we have now with some of these countries in Central America. We have with Guatemala, and we're working on other countries. With the federal regulation, which requires an individual who passed through a safe third country to make a claim for asylum in that country in order to be eligible to make a claim in this country. So there's various things. We've used the tools that Congress has given us thus far. We've asked Congress, and we started asking in the last administration when the family unit and unaccompanied alien child or children crisis started in 2014. There's a couple quick fixes that Congress could do on one sheet of paper that would solve this problem. Fix the Flores settlement agreement, allow us to hold these family units for a short period of time while they go through the immigration process. When we did that in 2014 and 2015, when we set up family detention in the Obama administration, the numbers plummeted. It's all for those individuals, and for most of the individuals trying to come here in this country, it's about the release. If they can get to this country and be released, they've won, because they know that even if they don't show up for their hearings, and even if they get ordered removed by an immigration judge, they know that we don't simply have the resources to track down all of them, and it's a gamble. So Congress could fix the Flores settlement agreement tomorrow. They can fix TVPRA, which would allow us to treat UACs from non-contiguous countries the same way we treat UACs from contiguous countries, and they could fix the credible fear threshold. Right now, we have a system whereby somebody wants to come to this country and make a claim for asylum. There's two standards. There's the initial standard, the credible fear standard, which is a very low bar to get over, which is why most of the individuals that come here and claim asylum or claim credible fear do get a positive credible fear finding. But when they actually go in front of a judge and have to meet the legal standards for asylum in this country, it's about a 10% approval rate for those individuals from Central America. So the system is broken. Congress can fix it. They've chosen not to. Ma'am.
Can you talk at all about, there's been reports recently, I'm sorry, I didn't identify myself, Stella Chavez from KRA News. There were reports recently about asylum officers and other officials, not wanting to go through the process because the threshold for those asylum cases is the bar has been raised so high. And so, for example, in one of the reports I read, somebody who's coming over from Central America but has to be sent back to Mexico to wait under the Remain in Mexico policy, they're being threatened in their country, but they're being forced to say, or they feel they have to say they're being threatened in Mexico as opposed to their actual country. I don't know if you can talk at all about that. It's just become so much more difficult, and some people are frustrated because they're trying to go through the proper channels, but can't even meet that threshold.
Okay, so first off, CIS runs the asylum program. I can speak to this a little bit at a high level, but first off, entering this country illegally and going to a Border Patrol officer and turning yourself in is not the proper channel. If you want to make an asylum claim in this country, you go to a port of entry and you do it that way. That's the lawful way to make an asylum claim in this country. Secondly, the credible fear threshold has not changed. So when the migrant protection protocols were established and when individuals are screened under that program, they are screened for the credible fear with regard to whether they have a credible fear of returning home to their home countries. They are also screened if they have a credible fear of remaining in Mexico while they wait for that court process to go through. If individuals found to have a credible fear of both their home country and Mexico, then they are not part of that program, and they are removed from. They never go into that program. They do not get returned back to Mexico. Sir.
Telemundo, do you have more information about the human traffickers? For example, how many people are arrested or to which country?
So we've had more than 1,000 prosecutions. Are you talking human trafficking in general? So I can give you the numbers for our Homeland Security investigations. We released our numbers last week. So human trafficking in FY19, we made 2,197 criminal arrests for human trafficking. Yeah, and that was almost 600 more than we did in FY18. And most of that stems from the resources that we sent down to the border. So we sent several hundred HSI special agents, intel analysts down to the Border Patrol sectors and had them work side by side to identify these organizations that were, and again, most of the human trafficking and smuggling that was occurring in that context were the fraudulent family units, where children were being smuggled, where unscrupulous individuals were paying and sometimes very small sums of money, $80, $100, to rent this child so that they could be released. And then they're taking this child somewhere in the middle of the country and dropping them off with a facilitator. And that individual that is taking those kids back, sometimes 5, 6, 7 kids at a time, takes them back to Central America, and the process starts again. It's when you talk about humanitarian crisis, as we've talked about, I don't think of anything more than a humanitarian crisis than a child being used as chattel for someone that might get illegally entering this country. Sir.
Alex with Fox News here in Dallas. Today, a federal judge blocked the Trump administration from being able to spend the Defense Department money to build the border wall in Mexico. The Justice Department says it will appeal it. I know Custom and Border Patrol, that's more of their issue, but how important is a wall, in your opinion, to helping your men and women fulfill their duties and do their job?
So, I think you've heard the Border Patrol speak to it throughout, and I think one of the unique parts about how the wall and where it would, and as you hear it described as a wall system, right? Because it's not going to be a uniform wall across the border. It isn't necessary in some places. Different geographic landscapes require certain types of barriers. But you listen to Border Patrol men, the guys with the boots on the ground, and they'll tell you the wall is critically important to what they're doing. And I can tell you from my experience being in immigration enforcement for the better part of 2 decades, when a wall was implemented in San Diego, when I started in '94, and there was the huge issue in San Diego with people running through the toll lanes and everything else, and the challenges that created with hundreds of thousands of running through Tijuana. And when the wall was built there and you saw the numbers drop precipitously, the wall has worked every time it's been utilized. I can't speak on the ongoing litigation, and I'm not directly involved in that. It would be helpful. It's certainly going to be helpful in terms of narcotics. We know there's large amounts of narcotics and the pass between the POEs, the ability to funnel both people and contraband towards the POEs, where we have greater detection systems, where CBP does have greater capability with regard to x-rays and other technology that could find these types of narcotics and contraband. That's obviously a better system for all.
So how does 2020 look for you guys? Do you expect for some of the resources allocated in order to come back for the internal operations, or are you planning on hiring more agents, or how does that look?
So we've pulled back a lot of the resources. As I mentioned, the numbers have dropped significantly. We were getting 140, 150,000 in 1 month earlier this year, and we're down to 30, 40,000. It's still too many. That's still 500,000 a year. But we are able to pull back some of our resources. One of the bigger challenges, though, and I kind of touched on it a little bit on my opening, is when CBP deals with this surge, it's the immediate having to take care of this individual, both from a humanitarian perspective and processing them for whatever removal process they're going to be into, if they're going to be screened by CIS for asylum, all that lasts for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and then that resource requirement is no longer required by Border Patrol. They go on to the next case. Those individuals come to our docket, which we're responsible for managing. So even if the numbers slow, which they are and hopefully continue to do so, we're still left with the nearly 1 million people that entered this year illegally that now have to work their way through the court system. We have to manage those cases. If they're in detained custody, we have to detain them, obviously, and manage those cases on the detained docket. If they're non-detained cases, we have to manage those non-detained cases. Some of those are on a form of alternative to detention. We have to monitor those cases. Some of these individuals, and most of the individuals, are going to end up not having any lawful claim of staying here in this country. A vast majority of those individuals that get a removal order probably aren't even showing up for their hearing, and it's up to the people back here to try to go out and locate those individuals and arrest them. So the staggering numbers that we saw this past year will reverberate through ICE for the next decade.
We have time for just one very quick question.
All right, thank you everybody for your time. I appreciate you coming.